We are continuing our exploration of Buddhist cosmology, now with the Asura realm. And it's a fascinating area because its specific mentality is very common even among ordinary human beings. So to understand the Asura realm, we have to look at the origin of the story. The name actually derives from a moment of failure. The Asuras, or Ashuras, or I guess the intonation is more like Asura, Ashuras, were originally the inhabitants of Tavatimsa, or Tavatimsa, the heaven, that particular level of heaven at the peak of Mount Sineru. But they were thrown out after a massive bout of drunkenness. So they tumbled down the mountainside in the story and regained their consciousness at a lower level. And as this was happening, they cried out, Nasura Bhavati, meaning, we will not drink liquor again. So they were originally invited to this, I guess, beautiful banquet, this big dinner, and there was wine, and they binged on it. They overconsumed it. They were actually warned by somebody there, I don't know, maybe an actual god, to not drink the wine, but they did. And this is much like humans who get into trouble while drunk, and we do these ridiculous, stupid things, and then when we sober up, we swear off the bottle the next morning. And these beings weren't just drinking anything; they were consuming this particular wine called Diba. It's a heavenly version of the finest champagne. And now before this fall, when Saka, this is the Buddhist Indra, and his 33 companions were reborn in Tavatimsa due to their great merit on earth, the Ashuras, or let's say this right, the Ashuras welcomed them with a feast. And Saka warned his crew not to touch the liquor, knowing that it leads to heedlessness. But the Ashuras drank until they passed out on the golden sands. And seizing the opportunity, Saka had his companions pick them up by their heels and toss them off the mountain, declaring he would not share heaven with such people, these drunkards of the special champagne. So the Ashuras landed at the base of the mountain beneath the ocean, because all of these mountains are surrounded by ocean rings. And this is a curious detail because it's not really explained how these beings really function biologically, explicitly, right? So they aren't explicitly described as being, semi-aquatic beings, or with gills, or with lungs. There's no, as far as I know, there's no specific detail on this. So somehow they're in the bottom of this water, but they're able to, as far as we know, they are air-breathing beings. They breathe what is essentially air or some kind of atmosphere, similar to our own. And so it could be interpreted that the surface of the sea is more of a magical gateway or a portal between their realm and the Ashura Bhawana, or Ashura Bhawana. So it could be an ocean, but it could also be a portal at the same time, and so you can just kind of live there or hang around there without drowning. But essentially, this realm is indeed a distorted mirror. It's a mirror image of the heaven at the peak. So while the Tavatimsa gods are primarily caught in the defilement of sensuality, the Asuras are trapped in the opposite. And they're very similar. They're almost like in a mirror image. They are trapped in a cruder sensuality, the sense emotions, or the crude emotions of ill will, anger, hatred, jealousy, pride. And yet you have to keep in mind that this level of jealousy, envy, and anger is still quite subtle. It's more subtle than us. If they were really like us, they would fall down to our level in the physical world. I think it's more appropriate to say that the Tavatimsa are more so caught in the defilement of just subtle attachment to bliss, attachment to the jhanas, to rapture, and to comfort and a sense of security, because they're so subtle. So to the gods, looking down on the Ashura realm is like, it's like a dark funhouse version of themselves and of their own home. It's like a mirror image, but I would say not completely absolute inverse, not like a hell realm, but a lower version of their dimension, for sure. Because the absolute opposite, there does exist a hell realm that is completely opposite to, in power, of the Asuras, and rather the God realm. And because there are, as above, so below, there are 9 orders of both the higher and lower realms. They have their hierarchy or their orders. In heaven, another word is choirs. These sort of structures of evolution. So as a side note, a key part of this cosmology, however, is the use of symbolic trees, which we see in a number of religions, but the trees are used often in folklore, and they symbolize different things. Often it's some kind of symbol for a tree that symbolizes life, like the Kabbalah tree of life. These trees also kind of they sort of symbolize life, but more so in the area of dimensions and time spans. So that's why these ones are called kappa, and they last for an entire world age. So these trees are not eternal templates, but they do have a lifespan as well. And there are 7 of these trees in total, 1 for each of the 4 world islands, and 1 for the great kings, and 1 for the Tavatimsa. And so I think this fits reasonably well when you compare it to the 7 astral planes: astral, mental, causal world, Buddhic, Atmic, etc. But they may not correspond exactly the same. And if I did mention as well a tree for the Ashura realm, these symbols are very good for memory. They're useful that way. And the most famous tree is the Parachatta, or the Parichataka tree in heaven, which has beautiful blossoms that famously showered the earth when the Buddha passed away. So the Ashura tree, the Chittapatali, is different. The Asuras often forget that they have fallen until their tree begins to flower. And what they notice is they see that their blossoms don't match the beauty of the heavenly ones. I think the blossoms are different, or they just don't look as nice, and that's what allows them to remember that they're no longer in heaven. And so this consumes them in resentment. And I don't know exactly what they feel. Maybe they also feel anger in general towards themselves, or as well as envy or jealousy toward the gods who did remain there. So in the stories, they swarm up the sides of Mount Sineru like ants up a pillar of up a pillar toward it to attack, and they tried to reclaim their lost home. And because of this, Tavatimsa is the highest realm where it's the highest realm. It's the last one where conflict and war are still occurring. It's the last and highest place where there is still some conflict. So psychologically, it's a powerful image. It's a powerful painting in the mind, the state of being defined by the memory of having fallen from a higher existence, and to bring these closer to their original lengths. I've expanded the descriptions from my last write-up. Now, this discussion regarding the sun and the moon highlights a interesting distinction in approach, as well as in spirit, between ancient Indian cosmology and that of the Greek and Europeans. So the Western vision of the universe, which persists in modern times, is built entirely upon the meticulous observation of stars and planets and celestial cycles in an attempt to account for their physical mechanics. And as I said, this practice didn't seem to concern the ancient Indians much at all. From a narrowly practical or scientific perspective, their model of the sun and moon existing at half the height of Mount Sineru, with night occurring simply because they cross behind the mountain, that fails under even basic observation of daily and annual movements. And yet this lack of physical accuracy doesn't seem to be a concern for them, as they weren't trying to primarily explain the observed movements of the heavens in such a precise astronomical way. But, to put it in perspective, consider the approach of a musician. There are a number of ways to understand music. The Greeks approached it mathematically, describing it as the division of strings into specific lengths. And being a musician myself, I've studied music. There are different aspects to it, right? When you want to compose music, there's a difference between songwriting theory and music theory. All of us have an idea about what music theory is, but songwriting theory is different. It's more emotional, because you're having to put together the theory and the mathematics and the physics even of the music and the notation and the sounds, and turn it into something that has emotional impact. So there are different areas of study, and there's also lyrics too. And but music theory is a pretty linear subject, and it doesn't have very much to do with the experience of music, the effect of music. So in Indian cosmology, it's about the music as an emotional experience. The Greeks are about music more so in a technical way. And so we may have moved into kind of the wrong focus or motivation, because you can't just live with with the music at a theoretical and intellectual level, that understanding, you gain the experience of music from that magic of the music itself and what it does to your being and your emotions and your mood. The fact that you can explain how sounds are created isn't really the point of music ultimately. It's just a means to creating it. And so it's a feeling that you experience. So it's vital for people to allow this enchantment of the universe, their imagination and their intrigue of it, the appreciation of the mythology, and the emotional experience of it. It's, as I said in the previous lecture, it's not just geography or history or stories, but it's a reality, and it's experiential, and these are living beings, real beings, and these are living organic realms or worlds that do exist out there and amongst us, interwoven in the different dimensions that we can't see. So it's a matter of music and of art, not of just the theory. And when we're approaching these cosmological descriptions, the best path is to take them on their own terms and enter that imaginative space. We can start with our imagination, thinking about it and enjoying the stories. And then we can actually begin to meditate on these and start to really see for ourselves the reality behind these stories and dimensions. And we can even visit them. We can start to see them in meditation and truly objectively see what they look like in things and study them, and even step into these levels when we enter into higher states of consciousness, typically in the jhanas. So we can avoid the modern tendency to psychologize everything into mere analogs for the mind to, or rather to twist the descriptions to fit the scientific data. That's useful just as in terms of, and it's interesting to as a term, as a form of understanding. But it can be a bit misguided because it's not really necessary. It's just a way of referencing and checking the accuracy of how these things are described in the scriptures. But one approach is to stop discounting the material and just simply literalize it at first. You could try to enter that world as if it were a movie. You don't ruin the experience by pointing out, the screen that it's on, or the lighting effects they're using, and the cameras, and the frame rate, and the makeup, because this can, take away from the point of it. It takes away from the story. It takes away from the experience and the immersion aspect. And you don't want to rush to interpret either, because the truth of these places will emerge from experiencing them itself. The more educated we become, the more we tend to analyze and try to compare and judge in things, but this can ruin the experience, and we could be wrong too. So we have to just be open to what we receive. We should be asking if there's a reality, or if a reality is something other than a story. Because if we maintain a barrier between ourselves and the story, we'll never truly experience it. For example, when people ask how much of the scripture is real, this is a somewhat naive question, because you could turn it back at them and ask how much of our mundane and daily world is real, as well. And it's a difficult, it's kind of a, it's also a hard question because you have to define what real really means. There are levels of reality, many levels. Each subtler and higher level of reality is closer and closer to the great reality. For example, is Seattle a real city? I've been there, and I've heard others describe it, and I've heard the thing that's history in the 1990s, and I've heard that Nirvana kind of grew up there or lived nearby there. They performed a lot of shows, and yet, are we describing the same place? And there are multiple big cities, major cities existing in different immersions of these people as experiences that require different levels of consciousness to perceive as well. But, and you know, as it sounds kind of abstract, but a better way to understand it is perfectly described by the Zen master Dogen. The point that I was getting at is that everyone's experience is different, right? The experience of that city in the 90s is different than now, with everything. The culture has changed, the music scene has changed. You know, so the Zen master, what he points out in his Sansui Kyo, Mountains and Waters Sutra, is that everything comes down to your level of perception. So your reality comes down to, or what is real, it depends on your perspective and your perception, which are more or less the same thing. So, because a reality is conditioned all the time. Unless you're in the great reality, your reality is going to have some form of conditioning or delusion. It has to. There's nothing is real until you get out of samsara, right? Until you get out of time and karma. A river, he says, a river that is clean and flowing with water to a human being, that is an ordinary physical river. But to a hungry ghost, it looks like filth flowing through a river of filth. And to a being in the hell realm, it looks like a river of molten lava. Or to a naga, a water serpent, it looks like a crystal palace, or a beautiful celestial river with a palace flowing along it or situated nearby. So then the question is, where is the real river? So we don't know. They're all real at their level, right? They're levels of reality. So by entering these worlds imaginatively and using your real suprasensible imagination, your consciousness, not just your projective imagination, but through meditation, we can understand the human condition in this mundane world much better by comparison. Because you can't fully understand a state of being if you're still trapped inside of it or restricted to that level, right? You have to step outside of that level and look back at it from different angles to, like, at it in its entirety, to understand it, to really comprehend it. Our current human condition is just merely one tiny piece. It's not even a sliver of a pie, and it's a variation in an infinitely vast constellation of consciousness and mental formations and bodily forms. So stepping outside of that, even just imaginatively, provides some new perspective. But ultimately, when you can immerse yourself in other worlds It's like climbing a hill and looking down at your city that you usually live in. The entire perspective is completely different. You see it as a whole, or you see it from a different angle. The whole layout is different. You understand the streets and the roads differently. It's very completely different perspective. And therefore, to fully understand experience, you need both the internal and the external perspectives. Within the sense desire world, we can look down into realms of greater suffering, and we can look up into the higher dimensions of the devas, which are a more refined pleasure, which have more refined pleasures. And through that comparison, that's how we can have much greater comprehension of our situation here in the physical world with our sense pleasures, our sensual lives, and our suffering. We can understand that more clearly. Now, stepping beyond sense desire into the realm of the Brahma gods, this offers an even more radical perspective, because the sensual devas they're actually closer to humans than they are to the Brahma gods. We have transcended the Brahma gods have transcended that entire complication of biology and having bodies, both with its pleasures and its struggles, because they live in a highly refined state. So when the Asura armies finally storm the slopes and reach the gates of heaven, they often falter, usually. It's inevitably impossible. They falter in a way that reveals their true nature. Because despite their constant bravado and blustering, they are easily frightened, and sometimes by nothing more than the imposing statues of Indra at the entrance. So these demigods or asuras are full of bluff, and they actually lack the true courage. So one famous legend illustrates that illustrates this during a war where Saka was descending Mount Sineru in his chariot to engage the Asura host. And as he passed over Simbali Grove, the home of the giant bird-like beings known as Supanas, he heard piercing cries of distress. And when he asked his charioteer, Matali, for the source where the sound was coming from, he learned that the sheer force of their chariot's passage was destroying the birds' nests and sending their young tumbling into the sea. So Saka immediately ordered the chariot to be turned around. He declared that he would not destroy innocent lives, even for the sake of a military victory. And when the Asuras saw the chariot turn, they completely misinterpreted the move. They assumed it was a clever tactical maneuver, or that reinforcements from another world system were arriving. So even just from Saka turning back, they're not seeing this even as a defeat. They're seeing this as they're still afraid of this. So terrified by their own imagination, these Asuras fled back to their palace, assuming that something else, that he was going to, do more, send some more military personnel, some kind of ally. And they fled back to their palace under the ocean. So this story highlights a very profound ethical drive, and I should say ethical divide. The devas adhere to a standard of minimizing collateral damage and protecting the innocent. They have very high standards for their morals. Whereas the asuras are defined by a rougher and more heedless aggression. So this lack of moral restraint is also evident in how the asuras treated the rishis, or holy seers who lived in communities where the mountain meets the sea. During one incursion, the leader of these seers asked the Asura king Sambara for protection, and Sambara mockingly refused, calling them partisans of Saka. The seers then placed a curse upon this Asura king. So it leads to direct mental agony, but it could probably mean, and all sorts of other consequences, I'm sure. But that's how the story goes. Really, it tends to just return in the same way it came. That's usually how it works. It's like invariance. It's the same law. It's like as above, so below. Action and reaction. It comes in the way it was given. Now, interestingly, the relationship between Wepakshiti and Saka was not strictly one of warfare. They were actually relatives. So Saka had married Vipachiti's daughter, Sujata, making the two kings father-in-law and son-in-law. And between their periodic wars, they would sometimes travel together in a friendly manner, acting as odd bedfellows in the complex theater of celestial politics. So this is quite interesting. The story of Sujata herself is deeply moving. In a previous human life, she was the only one of Saka's 4 wives who failed to make merit, leading to her rebirth as a crane. And Saka eventually tracked her down, and after testing her resolve by disguising himself as a dead fish to see if she would break her precepts, he guided her toward the merit making that allowed her to be reborn as an Asura princess. So she was extremely lucky because of that. And when she came of age, she was able to choose a husband by casting a wreath of flowers over the neck of her chosen suitor. So Saka entered the grand assembly disguised as an old, withered, and ugly Asura. And while the other lords mocked his appearance, Sujata felt the pull of their past karmic connection. So she saw through this disguise to his internal beauty of virtue, what we might call his true music. And she cast the wreath over him. The Asuras were enraged to find that they had been fooled once again, leading to a high-speed celestial chariot chase as Saka and Sujata escaped back to the peak of the mountain. So this narrative reminds us that relationships are sustained by shared morality, and that true beauty is found in virtue, not superficial forms. And you can see this from your own experience when you act in different ways. If you look at yourself in an astral mirror, or if you ask your higher self or ask your Tathagata what you look like, it's usually a reflection of your inner state, your overall frequency, and your present virtue. The more selfless you are, the more beautiful you will appear. And ultimately, these are not just ancient fables. They are descriptions of these realities that we inhabit. So we're preparing our consciousness for immersion in these realms right now by studying this. and through our daily human actions. So our immediate reality is our subjective experience and what we can perceive directly with our own eyes in the present state of mind. And in another example that best illustrates this is some of the stories of the Naga realms. In one of them, these Nagas wish to reward a virtuous human, so they invite him into their underwater kingdom. And for 100 years, this human has the benefit of living in the beautiful crystal palace, served by these beautiful Naga maidens in human form. And he experiences exquisite music and fine food and every sensual pleasure, all because of his internal merit. It allows him to perceive that realm's beauty. And that's, of course, how he earned it as well, that experience. So he's there for about 100 years until he actually manages to progress beyond sense pleasure. So he doesn't entrophize or succumb to entropy. He doesn't get worse over time. He does manage to get better, at which point he gets returned to the human world just so that he can carry out the great work as an ascetic, so that he has a more conducive environment to work in. Now, in stark contrast, there is, I think in the same story, there is a scoundrel, an evil scoundrel, who tricks the Nagas into believing that he's virtuous so he can gain entry. But what ends up happening is he arrives at this place and his experience is much closer to that of a nightmare. So to him, the beautiful Naga maidens appear as ferocious, terrifying yakas. The magnificent palace doesn't look like a palace at all. It looks like this horrible prison. And not only this, but he's also unable to eat the food because it just appears very unappetizing and perhaps even repulsive. So he's here in this place that he thinks he wants to be, but his consciousness has turned it into a realm of torment because that's his level. So, we have kind of this phenomenon of varying perception in the physical world too. There are many animals and creatures of varying degrees of evolution and that live in different parts of the world, such as the deep sea or the mountains, and so, or as bacteria or something, that simply don't have the intelligence or sense organs to see the world the way that most mammals or humans do, or appreciate music the way that we do. Even animals, many of them can't appreciate music the way that we do. Or even people can't fully appreciate and have a hard time understanding music when they don't, or comprehending the beauty of it when they don't understand music theory. So it's universal that a being's perception is limited to their intelligence and wisdom. And that wisdom comes from both their own work and also their evolution. Now, people often ask if these realms are real, but the answer to this question really depends on your definition of reality, because this is slightly sophisticated. It is a sophisticated topic. And it's relative. That's what makes it more sophisticated. There isn't just one obvious reality to everyone. Every dimension is just a narrow and very limited manifestation of the great absolute reality. So by this fact, it's also true that you could say every world of existence within samsara is illusory or unreal. It's not true. But this isn't really what people usually mean when they ask this question. Is it real? What they mean is that, are these places just mere metaphors or symbols, or are they real, literal, perceptible places that we can live in? And the answer is yes, absolutely. All of the realms described in Buddhism and in the scriptures are real, inhabitable places that closely resemble the descriptions. It's only since the past couple of years, the past couple hundreds of years or so, that people have actually started to question the legitimacy of other worlds that religions describe. Whereas before it was more universally accepted. But nowadays, we will not believe anything until we see it for ourselves or gain scientific proof. And science has become the standard since the modern era, which is unfortunate still in this time, because nobody wants to believe anything. We have a very hard time believing things that we can't see for ourselves. So we still have a ways to go before we can completely prove these things, these psychic phenomenon and dimensions and religious phenomenon or spiritual matters, dimensions, past lives, stuff like that. It'll take a while before we can actually, for instance, view our dreams on a TV screen or look at our past lives on TV. Things like that. Now, going back to the Asura realm, there's another distinct Asura known as Rahu, who's worth mentioning. He's very distinct because he is regarded as the largest of all beings with a physical body. He's so immense that when he stands in the ocean, the water doesn't even reach his knees. So he says he doesn't understand why everyone else claims the ocean to be so deep. He says that in the suttas. But Rahu is also described as the cause of eclipses. Whenever he notices the sun or the moon, he becomes jealous of their brilliance, and in his envy, he attempts to cover them with a partial eclipse or swallow them entirely, which creates a total eclipse. But he never succeeds at this. He never succeeds in stopping their movement and always ends up having to release them. Now, a key lesson in Rahu's story emerges in this tale of his attempt to swallow the moon. So the deities associated with the moon turn to the Buddha for guidance, and the Buddha teaches that their protection is found in faith in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, as well as in their own moral virtue. So he explains that Rahu ultimately can't harm them, and that if he were to swallow the moon, it would merely pass through his head. Now, the only moral that I've considered about Rahu's presence at all or existence in the suttas might be that he represents authoritarianism or totalitarianism, and that by abiding by the superior laws of nature as one large society, by being religious or spiritual as a whole, living conducively for spiritual progress, we can naturally overcome abusive people in power. Because we see in certain Oriental cultures, during eclipses, people gather around together in large groups and make a loud ruckus with pots and pans and firecrackers, shouting at Rahu and scaring him away. That's the idea. So it's not something that you're supposed to do quietly by yourself. It's like this big event with lots of people. But this is just a speculation. It's I don't know if anyone really knows the true meaning behind, or the true significance behind Rahu. So to briefly summarize the cosmological settings we've described here, in general, the basis of the universe and existence is these world systems that have the Mount Sineru in the center, which is the world axis in Buddhist cosmology. And this is an immense mountain rising 84,000 yojanas, both above and below sea level. And the realm of the four great kings is located halfway up its height. The mountain slopes are populated by many fantastic beings like gigantic bird-like supanas. And at the summit lies the heaven of the 33, ruled by Sakka, who is essentially Indra, but this is the Buddhist form, and the benevolent figure. And as well, it's inhabited by the gods who preside over the world system. And beneath the mountain, under the sea, spans the realm of the Asuras, these perpetual enemies and contenders of the gods who ceaselessly strive to reclaim the kingdom that crowns the mountaintop, but always end up failing because of their wrong means, because they tried to climb up the mountaintop through their envy and their jealousy and their pride and anger. And they try to do it physically too, I suppose. In the suttas, it's described that they climb the mountain. And that's not necessarily how it works, because it's a psychological work. So one must be pious. One must follow the Dhamma to ascend these levels.